really resonated with me because I like the support of a big company, but the scrappiness of a startup. Afterwards, I continued to do freelance consulting, and I co-founded my second startup called Scriber, which I'm currently still working on the side. It's again AI-powered podcast transcription platform that's more of a community-driven product. Just like throughout my entire design experience, I've always taken any contract or freelance opportunity I can come across. And anytime I met the right people, I would try and go in and do some sort of, entrepreneurship type product. And I'm gonna explain how this all ties in. I'm almost done the boring part, I swear. After that, I did my own design agency with another friend. Agency sucks. I would never recommend it because you're essentially like somebody's slave. You have no product ownership and you have to do whatever it takes to pay the bills. But I'm glad I got out of my system. So I did this for about a year. It was a startup. It was an agency called Code Mode, and we primarily started with digital innovation for big companies because that's what I knew how to do at Shopify. But then I realized that it doesn't really pay that well. So we pivoted towards a niche called digital transformation, where you're basically applying a tech approach and creating new tech solutions for, like more of the classic boring industries that don't have a lot of, systems that have been streamlined through tech, and they still run like on, tech and pen and paper, and also like very old legacy software in 1990s. And then all of that accumulated when Facebook reached out to me for a role in ads, which I did for about a year and got that experience and growth, but it wasn't really my passion. Last November, I was offered an opportunity to lead a new product initiative within Facebook MPE, and that's where I am today. So I kind of want to distill down like my entire insights from all my kind of like career progression and like kind of all the steps I took to kind of lead me to the point I am today, because I'm hoping a lot of this will be applicable and transferable to you. Ideally, this should save you a couple years of pain and suffering, so let's hope it's useful. Apologize in advance for the really bad memes. I'm like super old now and I feel like these are not up to date. I just Googled these really quickly to add some visual interest in my slides. So the first thing I want to share with you guys is that there are two types of markets in terms of jobs. There is a winner-take-all market and an auction market. Traditionally, everyone thinks of a job or career as a winner-take-all market, where it's dominated and mastery in one specific skill. You become a really, really good designer, a really, really good accountant, a really, really good lawyer, and just like very, very like one directional. This is not true. Like the jobs that actually are winner take all are jobs that you have to start training from a very young age, like being a pro athlete, being a pro musician, being a comedian, because it's dominated with a mastery in one skill. Design, as you guys know, is kind of spread out across many different skills. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of different intersections. No two designer role is the same. So it falls into the second category called auction markets. And auction markets are dominated by a combination of skills and by the relevance of skills. And being a good fit as a designer for a company is actually critical. Like, for example, right now, I know exactly which companies I would have a disproportionate impact on as a designer and which companies I would suck at. So you might be a senior designer at one company, and then you switch to a different field where you have no domain expertise, no context, and you might be junior again. So as new bootcamp graduates, I think it's really important for you to understand which domain and what kind of context-based skills you have that give you a disproportionate impact or disproportionate advantage in. I always like to say that no designer truly starts from zero, because traditional design education hasn't existed for that long, and I don't even know if it's considered good. But most of you guys probably came from either a unrelated career before switching to design, or you came from a different educational background. That's actually really, really powerful if you can learn how to leverage it. For example, if you came from an accounting background, you might have a better chance getting a job in fintech. If you came from a background where you did, journalism or poli-sci or sociology, you would have an edge in UX writing. If you came from a science background, you have an edge in user research or in, data. If you have a background in computer science, you might have an edge in performance design, front-end development, etc. Design is so vast that I think it's almost literally impossible to have a field that's completely unrelated. You just need to kind of think about, what skills are transferable, what unique context you do have, and kind of go from there. And I'll elaborate on this piece in a sec. So one thing I kind of want to also explain is that people have this misconception about jobs and career. They always want job security, which is not good because job security just means that you'll never get fired. You end up being that designer that's been in a company for 20 years using really outdated tech stacks. What you want for a successful career is job mobility. You're basically always rewarded for moving companies and switching companies. Like once you've hit like a 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 year mark at a company, generally you're going to get very diminished learnings. And as a designer, if you want to be valuable, get a lot of great career options, you want a lot of mobility, which is, if you were to get fired or if you were to quit, you should be able to find a equivalent job or better within a week or two. And that's the kind of job mobility that you do want. And mobility is leverage, and having leverage will just open up a lot of opportunities in both like negotiation for compensation and also for job options in general. So what you want to do in order to achieve mobility is develop something called a career mode, which is a set of rare, unique, valuable skills that only you have or you're disproportionately good at. And knowing like which markets and which types of companies would find that extremely valuable and would be willing to reach or be willing to pay a premium in. Essentially, you want to hit that 99th percentile kind of status, which sounds hard, but I'll actually explain the trick to this. So before I dive into how to become a 99th percentile designer, I want to talk about rare, unique skills. So there's essentially like two paths, or I guess like just technically three paths towards, becoming a very highly sought after designer and having a lot of career success. So one is to develop rare and unique skills. And these tend to be something very unsexy, meaning nobody really wants to do it, but it typically pays really well. And it's in very high demand. An example would be the COBOL programming language, which is this very, very messy, ugly, annoying programming language to learn. And the only people that really know this language are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. But for some reason, the entirety of our financial and government institutions are run on this language. And really good COBOL programmers can command a salary of up to $500K a year. But no new grad wants to learn it because it's so awful to work with. So that's the first factor to becoming exceptional, doing something unsexy. The second is to predict the future, basically anticipating future demand. And right now you can do this in emerging technologies or emerging industries like AR, VR, IoT, AI, blockchain are emerging technologies, which you can bet on that they hopefully become higher in demand in the future and you want to ride that wave, or in kind of traditionally non-tech industries that might be in the process of digital transformation. For example, construction, supply chain logistics. Previously, the two big digital transformation fields were health tech and fintech. So in the future, we're going to see more and more industries adopt that. And if you come from a background where you have a context within an industry that hasn't been digitally transformed, you can potentially ride that wave as well. And then the third path is a opaque path to mastery. What this means is essentially like not being easy to learn. If there's like a book or online course or a bootcamp that teaches you this, then it's probably not going to be opaque. Some examples of design skills or accessory skills are very hard to learn, but very high in demand right now are sustainability design, which is, websites and apps that generate like a lot of waste a lot of electricity and power. There are certain design techniques you can do to reduce the carbon and environmental footprint of apps. And that's actually going to be, in my opinion, very, very high in demand in the future. But right now, it's so hard to learn how to do this. There's performance design, which is related to page loading times and accessibility within areas of like really bad connection or like really old devices. There's growth design, which is going to be A/B testing and driving business metrics, and then internationalization, which is how do you adapt your product or service or system for different areas of the world, accounting for all the cultural and language differences. So becoming 99th percentile in general design is extremely, extremely hard because you're gonna have to compete with people with like decades of experience on you or people that are just extremely talented. So the secret to actually becoming a 99th percentile designer is to find a specific niche or problem space that you really excel in, ideally something that is driven by your natural curiosity. So the secret here is that if you are 75th percentile, which is just like a little bit better than average, it's like decent in two areas, the intersection of those two areas will automatically make you 99th percentile. So we've actually seen this happen a lot in the past decade or two. The number of new industries and fields have gone up exponentially, and they're all combined based off existing intersections. So a very classic example is Sir Isaac Newton, the guy with the apple and gravity. Like he basically invented physics, right? And physics was just the intersection of math and science at the time. And he was neither 99th percentile in either of them, but he just combined the two and created this new field in which he became, the best at the time in. We've seen this in other industries as well. For example, IoT, Internet of Things, that's a combination of software and hardware. Growth design is a combination of psychology, data, and design, or interaction design technically. So if you're able to figure out what your unfair advantages are in terms of your context, your background, and also what you're naturally curious at, and figure out ways to connect the two, that's the path to having that career mobility, having that career moat. One thing I wanted to call out as a skill set that a lot of new designers don't really recognize is context. So when we think about skills, there's essentially just technical skills and soft skills. Soft skills as a designer are going to be really important. It's mostly going to be communication. Technical skills you guys are learning right now in your bootcamp. But the third set is called context. And every single design process, no matter what company you're at, starts with context gathering. So if you start off with a lot of context or you have unique context, that's a huge competitive advantage that makes you a better candidate for companies and roles within that area. And I kind of see context split into three categories. There's cultural. So if you speak a different language or you've lived in a different area, companies that want to launch a product there or companies that are based there, you can apply your cultural context as leverage to kind of make yourself a more attractive candidate. For example, right now, emerging markets like India, Philippines, different parts of like China and Japan, if you have cultural context there, you become like a much more attractive candidate for companies looking to expand into those markets. Industrial context is basically, your prior career or your prior interests, if you're part of like a group, something that they target. If you're a gamer, gaming companies might want you more. If you have a background in finance, fintech companies will want you more. If you have a background in medicine, health tech companies will want you more. And then domain is kind of a specific problem area that you have a lot of experience in. So maybe it's onboarding, maybe it's logistics, maybe it's in transactions, maybe it's in enterprise. The list is very endless. You can basically almost nearly anyone will have some sort of context. You just need to find the right companies to kind of map it to. So the key TLDR is learn how to leverage your existing context as a competitive advantage to get your foot into the door for your first job. One other thing to kind of call out here is a big advocate for curiosity-driven learning. When you have to force yourself to learn certain things, or if you have to force yourself to complete XYZ course or read this book because other people recommend it, it's going to be very, very hard to make that a sustainable habit. you'll essentially like never be better than somebody that finds whatever you find hard fun and engaging. So one thing to kind of call it here is don't learn the same things as other people. Kind of follow your own curiosity and learn what actually excites you. And through that, you'll develop a lot of unique context-based skills and unique intersections of skills. And if you can combine it with design, that just kind of creates like some sort of magic. Water break. I've been talking for a long time. Okay. Next point here is evaluating career moves. This is kind of similar to the concept of job mobility. Some of the things I always ask myself when deciding if I want to leave a company or pursue a different opportunity is, will this career move teach me skills that are rare and valuable? Some design skills or some domain contexts or problem spaces are only accessible through actual work experience. Some things are very hard to learn by yourself. For example, product thinking. Think about whether or not this career move opens up more opportunities for you down the road. What context-based skills will you gain from this career move? Does this align with your career narrative? And is this move considered an upgrade? Because having a positive or exponential career trajectory is really important if you want to kind of, you know, exponentially increase your compensation as you go. And then another thing to think about is what tangible business impact can I feasibly achieve? I think actually there's enough time for this. So I kind of talked a bit about the curiosity-driven learning experience. Don't force yourself to think. Don't force yourself to learn things because you think you'll need it. That way you're always going to be behind. You're going to be draining your willpower. If it's in a course or a book, that skill is not going to be rare or unique. Focus on problems you're actually passionate about solving and passionate about changing and influencing, and then learn whatever you need to solve that problem at whatever level of depth and complexity you need to. So it doesn't mean you have to consume every resource or associated resource in its entirety. Just learn the little bits that are relevant to you because that's going to be the most engaging for you and most interesting. It's very okay to lose interest and pivot. I think Steve Jobs said this in his commencement speech at Stanford, but he said that it's impossible to connect the dots going forward, meaning it's really hard to plan your entire future career. It's only easy to connect the dots moving backward. So as you kind of chase your curiosity, you'll start to put things together in rare and unique ways that other people have not. And that's how you carve out your niche in order to really stand out as a designer. I think I repeated this point, but you'll never beat someone who finds what you hate doing fun. Um, just case in point for me, like my passion right now is in growth design. I'm really interested in psychology and data. And even after 8 hours of work, I spend another 4 or 5 hours reading up on this and doing projects related to this field for fun. And if some other designer who wasn't interested in this stuff but wanted to learn growth design because it pays really well, they would never really have the same amount of development as I do because of the lack of natural interest. Like they're sustaining their habits entirely on willpower. A really good article related to this topic is called The Bus Ticket Theory of Genius. If you type that into Google, Paul Graham, the founder of YC, wrote a really insightful article about this. I'll share the link to this deck afterwards so you don't have to write it down. I also mentioned that project-based learning is way more superior compared to content-based learning. So do little projects in spaces that you're passionate about instead of forcing yourself to finish courses or read books end to end. There's also a tool I use called Roam Research. It's a note-taking app that facilitates holistic learning, basically bi-directional linking nodes. I'll show you a screenshot of this afterwards. This is a much more superior learning style compared to siloed learning, which is consuming a resource end to end in kind of chronological order and forcing yourself to go through a specific curriculum. This is an example of Roam Research. Essentially how it works is you create these little nodes based on these notes, one for each topic, and you can link them together. And this kind of creates a stronger kind of mental model of different concepts. and helps you develop a unique kind of mental repository that's unique to you. This image right here is an example of mine that I started like last month. And as I kind of go through this process, I'm able to kind of connect all these ideas that I find interesting in very unique ways and then apply it to my design work. And this kind of skill set becomes entirely unique to me because it was driven entirely by my curiosity. Some of this won't be super relevant, but the pieces that do will kind of give you like an exponential return on investment in terms of your time. Cool. So I'll give you an example of the niche that I developed through my experiences at, PlayStation, Shopify, Facebook, and through startups. This is a unique kind of combination of skills based off, the things that I found interesting and curious along the way. And I was able to kind of connect the dots backwards and position myself as a designer really strong in these areas to eventually consistently get, really, really great jobs from top companies looking for this corresponding skill set. So some examples here: growth design, A/B, which is broken down into the sub-skills of A/B testing, experiment design, SEO, paid and organic growth, go-to-market strategies, marketing design, and growth hacking. In terms of product, understanding product market fit, consumer markets, retention, persuasion, motivation, and gamification, iteration speed, prototyping, idea generation, testing toolkits. So this is kind of like my unique skill profile that I developed. And then I was able to kind of leverage this into my current position and future positions, and kind of create that career moat and job mobility framework that I talked about. So as a designer, to become really successful and kind of, I guess, like frame yourself in your resume, portfolio, interviews, you want to articulate things in terms of business value that you create. So in business, there's two concepts. There's cost centers and profit centers. So cost centers are essentially the expenses required to run a business, and most businesses will always outsource this. So examples of this would be, customer support, logistics, essentially things that just like are required for the business, but don't have a clear link to, revenue generation. And then there's profit centers, which is directly linked to profit generation. And the ROI, return on investment, on hiring a employee within a profit center is very clear. And generally, profit centers would never be outsourced. So this is actually the difference between a good designer and a bad designer, a really well-paid designer and a really poorly paid designer. Good designers attach themselves to profit centers, and bad designers attach themselves to cost centers. So what this means is, as a designer, you need to be able to articulate all your design impact, all your design solutions in terms of business value created. So generally, there's four big buckets I look at, and very loosely, corporations and enterprises tend to focus on revenue generated and cost saved, and startups tend to focus on users acquired and user retention, so mostly growth metrics. So anytime you design something, you need to be able to frame it in terms of how you drove or increased at least one of these four things, either directly or indirectly. And usually you do that through the use of framing and proxy metrics. So I'll give you guys an example. Let's say you're approached by your employer or a freelance client to redesign a landing page. And if you were to, be like, all right, sure, I'm gonna redesign your landing page, you are basically associating yourself with a cost center because you're an expense to kind of produce a thing the business needs, but they aren't really sure how. So you kind of frame it as like being part of the profit center and doing more value-based pricing. You need to kind of uncover the business need or the business goal and understand the baseline. So for example, you ask them, why do you want to redesign this landing page? And then after some back and forth, you might find out that bounce rate of their website is abnormally high. It's like 90%. And the baseline bounce rate of a website in their category might be 40%. So there's a lot of potential and opportunity for growth. At that point, you want to kind of just like map out what is the potential business value impact you could create if you got their bounce rate to baseline. So for example, If you were to increase it by 20%, like 1 million people go through the website per month. Bounce rate is 90%, meaning only 100,000 actually get through. So if you increased it to even 50%, you would add 400,000 additional users. How much potential users or leads, like how much is that worth to the business? And by framing it that way, you can price accordingly and also map it to the user acquired metric for the startup. I don't know if that example made sense. Nod your head if so. Otherwise, I can elaborate a little bit more. Cool. And kind of on that note, if you were to do freelance work, there's two types of pricing as well that's loosely correlated with cost centers and profit centers. Cost center work is basically charging hourly because you're a service, you do X number of design hours, and then they pay you per hour. Profit center is understanding what the potential business upside is and then charging a percentage cut of the business value you create and doing it more project based. So I'll give you an example. When I first started design, I used to charge $100 an hour, which I thought was a lot. And a landing page redesign would take me, let's say, 10 hours and get $1,000 for it. And that'd be pretty good. But once I kind of shifted my way of thinking into profit centers and value-based pricing, I would uncover or estimate how much potential business value I would create, put a dollar value on it, and charge 10 to 20%. So in that landing page bounce rate example, which was actually a pretty common use case from my experience, a potential upside of generating, let's say, 500K extra leads or users landing through your funnel would be worth, let's say 100,000 or 200,000 for that company. Then charging 10 to 20% would net me 10 to 20K instead. And you might get some resistance when you kind of articulate your pricing structure this way. But if you think about it from a business owner's perspective, they're essentially all about making investments, right? And having a positive return on investment. So if you're a business owner, imagine, if you invest $100 and you get $110 back, like how many times would you make that deal? Like theoretically, you would do it an infinite number of times as long as the ROI is positive. So as a designer, you need to be able to figure out how to define the business value, articulate or calculate it, and kind of speak the same language as that as your client or employer or business owner, and structure your portfolio and resume and your credentials and yourself as somebody that's like very low risk in terms of the ROI by showing either demonstrating a context-based knowledge, showing that you really understand the business, to speaking the same language as them, and also having case studies that are relevant and specific to what they're trying to do. So to kind of tie that all up, hiring designers is an investment. You want to focus on increasing the perceived ROI, return on investment, of hiring you. Okay, I kind of realized I forgot to skip to this slide on my last, for what I said in the previous slide, but that's basically a freelance example I just talked about. I'll also talk about salary negotiation because I'm sure you guys will have to tackle this soon at some point. TLDR, you always want to negotiate salary. They always lowball you at the beginning. There's something called a salary band, which for your level is like a range of how much you're willing to pay you. And they'll usually, hiring is a risk, right? So they'll usually price you or give you an offer based off what the perceived ROI is or the perceived risk is. So to kind of minimize that risk and get the maximum amount of compensation you can negotiate, you want to articulate all your work in terms of business value you could generate or have generated in the past. You can do that by demonstrating a track record, by providing very specific examples and prompts and opportunities you see in their business. And this is where your domain context will be really valuable. And also just kind of learning how to speak the same language and kind of framing and identifying the prompt in terms of business opportunity and how design can help that. Throughout your career, this isn't like an early stage thing, but throughout your career, you want to create something called a brag document, which is either a folder or a document of every business metric or metric improvement you've made throughout your career, and also screenshots of every single piece of praise you've ever received. Start doing this like from your first job and create that kind of track record over time. In the future, when you do have to negotiate or when you have to create your portfolio, you can take out snippets from your brag document to supplement it. And that will also kind of lower the perceived ROI risk of hiring you at a higher salary. When you do your portfolio or when you talk about your work, always remember, unless you're talking to a design manager, impact is always more important than process. Don't show them sticky notes, don't show them wireframes. Most people don't understand or care about that. Talk about the actual impact and business value that you've generated. And lastly, I kind of mentioned this in terms of evaluating career moves, but don't take on any projects or roles that don't have potential business value impact. You might not have a lot of choice in this in the beginning, but whenever you can, focus on the products and projects that are likely to move the big metrics. So these are anything with experiments, growth design, anything related to their core business model. These are all going to be very good projects to work on if you want that career mobility and higher compensation in the future. Bad projects are, like internal kind of, usually internal tools, unless you have like a really big cost saving angle there, generally lower impact. Anything that's more like, illustrative or design system-y, those won't have like a very clear link to business value. So if you care about that stuff, I would avoid it. But again, take that with a grain of salt because every designer is different and your career goals might be different. Cool, that is the end of my talk. So I'm happy to open up to Q&A. Sorry if my voice kind of got really scratchy halfway through. I've been talking all day. But yeah, feel free to unmute your mics and ask me questions. On a side note, I also have a bunch of links to my socials here. You can follow me on Instagram, richard.ux. If you click on the link in my bio, you'll see links to all my stuff. I do a weekly group mentorship session on Facebook. I write a lot. I have a newsletter I publish weekly and also blog on Instagram. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you ever want to chat with me for mentorship or consulting, my Calendly link is below as well. Cool. That was it. So open Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Thanks so much, Richard. I just want to confirm, are you able to hear us? I know my counterpart, Dana, let me know that you were having some audio visual troubles.
I can hear you guys now.
Oh, perfect. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, anyone, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to unmute yourself or you can post in the chat as well.
I have a question actually for you, Richard. So you're talking about mobility of your career path. So what does that look like for you right now? Like you're a lead product design at Facebook. What does that forward momentum look like for someone in your position?
Right. So I think for me, based off all my experiences, I realized that I really like startups, but I also don't like how a lot of startups don't pay as much because I'm trying to retire early. So looking at my career path, what I'm optimizing for, I'm trying to build a personal brand reputation in the 0 to 100 consumer space and eventually partner with VC firms and angels to kind of get that founding designer role at VC-backed startups in the future, which I'm planning to do probably the next 2 to 3 years. The side goal is also to try and retire in the next, or like have the option to retire so I can start pursuing riskier startups in the future. So that's kind of like a side goal and why I've been focused entirely on incubators so far in my career journey.
Richard, can you talk a bit more about the incubator path and why that's worked well for you and sort of, I guess, what other people who are interested in that might look to do?
Sure. So the incubator path is pretty niche right now, but most big companies will have kind of either a corporate innovation arm or a incubator arm where they essentially like fund many startups within their company. So you have like all the resources of that bigger company and you have the opportunity to do a lot of kind of like scrappy design work, but have like the full support and resources of a big corporation. But you also get the opportunity to do a lot of like a big picture strategy on how your little startup product will eventually integrate into the overall company's vision. And some of the core skills for incubators are going to be similar to the skills you would need for a early stage startup. So essentially you need to be a really strong generalist that can do like an entire design project or product from scratch, creating your own visual identity, setting up your own design system, mapping out information architecture, having the skills for rapid prototyping. Two additional skills that are really important is iteration speed. So being able to design, test, and validate many different ideas. And also a really strong understanding of product thinking, product strategy, and product vision. And kind of within that vein, having really strong communication skills and salesmanship on pitching new visions and getting buy-in from senior executives.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Hi, Richard. I have to say, first and foremost, I think it's hilarious. We both have a very similar trajectory in like geographic life, like Markham, Newmarket area, then to Waterloo Way. So at some place we've probably crossed paths at one point or another. But I was really intrigued by what you were talking about for really differentiating your passion and why that's so integral to designing yourself and marketing yourself as we enter the job market. I recognize that for a lot of individuals who don't have a portfolio that can necessarily identify what value brought to a project per se, how could someone leverage it in a different way to be able to still differentiate their portfolios when there's many people graduating all at the same time looking at very similar positions?
That's a really fantastic question. So I think one kind of mindset shift is start thinking of yourself as a product and the employer as like a market or a customer. And you can't really take that general approach, right? Like a lot of new designers will kind of take that shotgun application approach and apply it to like, 1,000 companies across the board. You want to figure out like one very, very specific market or audience that you have the relevant skills to provide that disproportionate impact or exponential impact in. And in terms of kind of like framing your work, as a new designer, you might not have the business metrics handy. That would be the easiest way to reduce the perceived risk of hiring you. So other ways to kind of fill that gap without, having that track record is one, demonstrating domain context that's like highly relevant to the company. So I've screened like thousands and thousands of new grad portfolios now, and my biggest pet peeve is seeing people with the headline, hi, I'm Richard, I'm a product designer in Toronto, passionate about solving problems, right? Like that doesn't mean anything. It's very generic and specific. Instead, if you wrote something like, hi, I'm Richard, I'm a designer in Toronto, passionate about A/B testing and growth for the consumer food delivery space or something like that, and then I apply to just food delivery companies, that would be a lot more meaningful. Of course, if you have the relevant kind of context-based case studies within your portfolio. A very common kind of mistake is people doing generic redesigns. They'll do a redesign of Yelp, redesign of Spotify, and then, why did you redesign it? It's because, and they say like, oh, it's to improve usability or to make it more aesthetic. In 99% of the cases, unless you're extremely talented, you're never going to produce a better solution than a fully staffed design team. Instead, you should focus on a very, very specific problem that the app has not solved for a very specific use case or user. For example, what would Spotify look like for somebody that was deaf and wanted to use a podcast feature, right? That's something that hasn't been designed at all. So whatever case that you produce is going to provide a lot of value. So focus on kind of finding untapped opportunities, and they don't have to be big business opportunities, but just demonstrating that you have the context and the passion for that space and applying to companies within that space. It'll just make you seem like a much better match. And TLDR, just be very, very specific on like the types of problems that you're trying to solve. Like never ever just redesign things for usability sake or redesign things for like no real reason. Like have a very specific problem and audience in mind.
Thank you very much. And I guess that connects back to that passion. If you choose something that you're passionate about, then all of a sudden that work, that 20, 30 hours you put into that.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people will kind of look at, design portfolios and like, oh, like I need to do this. I'll make like a little like checklist, and it's going to feel very painful, and it's going to feel like it's a lot of work to kind of like produce all those artifacts because they think it has a correlation with getting hired. Every designer is actually unique. I'm not just saying that. So if you copy somebody else's cookie cutter portfolio template, it's not going to work very well for you. For example, other kind of senior designers and leads I know have like a very robust case study driven portfolio site. What I actually use is literally like a 50 slide deck from Google Slides, and it's just pages and pages of growth experiments I run and the business value I've generated. And it works very, very well for me because I know exactly which companies would find that valuable, and I only apply to those.
I got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Sort of like a extension to what Shannon's question was in a way. Let's say you have this work that you've, like this case study that you've worked on for some time, and you haven't had a chance to test it and get some business metrics. Do you kind of want to maybe make an educated assumption as to what impact that might make, or is that just like BS and nobody wants to really see that because it's not proven?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, one kind of hard thing about business impact for personal projects is that you won't have access to a lot of the data analytical tools, and you won't have like a data scientist to help you pull numbers. But that's only for quantitative data. You can still do qualitative data, and you just need to demonstrate a percentage change in some sort of proxy metric related to one of those 4 core business value metrics I talked about. And you can do that by getting some sort of baseline or getting some sort of, you can get a baseline and then use qualitative metrics through user research. For example, let's say you created a new product for some sort of use case. The baseline could be existing competitors in that space. You have people go through a concept test, or you have them go through a task flow, and you can measure certain metrics that might be tied towards, for example, cost reduction could be tied to time spent on task, which is a metric you can easily measure with a data scientist. You can look at, sentiment score and concept testing results to kind of map that to, user acquisition, like the top of the funnel. You can run like a first click test or a 5-second test between your new design and a competitor site or their old previous design that you innovated on top of, to get a sense of how to improve, user acquisition as a metric. It'd be a proxy measure, but it'd still be better than not showing anything at all. Does that help?
Yeah, that's actually really helpful. So basically, maybe start with possibly a competitor, see how long it takes, like try to measure something and try to see how your solution might sort of improve that timing or that quantifiable measure.
Yeah, just to add on to that too, you almost always want a baseline to compare your design with. And it doesn't mean, like, just because you didn't redesign something that already exists, that doesn't mean like there's no baseline, right? You can look at competitors and use them as a baseline. Sometimes if you get really creative, you might come up with a new product concept that, there's no existing one-to-one comparison, and they might be using a combination of tools, including both analog and digital, to kind of simulate or hack the desired experience, which you built like a full product for. In those scenarios, almost 100% of the time, you're going to have a very significant kind of like percentage change impact. For example, like let's say to-do lists like didn't exist, and you could use like people doing to-do list tasks with pen and paper, and then like copying it into Google Doc and like mapping out that workflow, and then comparing that to your to-do list app design, and using maybe time spent on task and also activation rate, which are both metrics that you can do without any analytical tools, and show that as a comparison, and then map or extrapolate that to one of the 4 core business value metrics.
That's really, really awesome information. Thank you for that. It's really inspiring.
No worries. Oops. Got 5 minutes left if there's any more questions. What did you guys think about the content overall? I wasn't sure if it was too much or too basic, or if it's just like not relevant at this stage.
I found a lot of great value out of it. I've never really considered looking at actual business value and value to startups in that way before. So for me, it was really inspiring and really valuable. I wouldn't say basic at all. Actually, I don't think I've really seen a lot of content specifically in that aspect. So that was really helpful for me.
I think at least for there, I believe there's 2 different groups in today, so I don't know if both syllabi align perfectly, but we were talking about the business side of design today, and I think it very much built upon what we were talking about. But I think it's a really great way to say that at the end of this, it's ultimately what we decide to put in. I think that's anything in life, right? Like if you're passionate about something, you're going to get it. If you have the right mentality towards it, you'll do it. But you have to remember that at the end of the day, you have to differentiate yourself. It's not just BrainStation that's going to make us, and now you're hireable. It's like, okay, what else did you do? So I'm glad you said it.
That's a great way to put it. It's gonna awkwardly stare at you guys for another 3 minutes if there's nothing else.
I actually got one.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry. If somebody wanted to reach out to yourself or other people for follow-up questions, mentorship, that kind of thing, what's the sort of ideal way to approach that?
Yeah, so all my links are here. I'm pretty active on Instagram, so you can just send me a DM, and then we can move the chat to whatever channel is more suitable. If you guys do want to hear more about kind of career insights and kind of a more in-depth explanation of some of the business value stuff I talked about, the first 3 articles or posts in my newsletter go into it in like a lot of detail. So if you guys want to learn more, I'd suggest checking out that resource first. And then I also have some stuff on, how to develop product thinking skills and interaction design skills on Medium if you guys are curious. But generally, yeah, LinkedIn or Instagram are going to be the best places to reach me for now. I'll post a link to the slide deck in my Facebook group too, if you guys choose to join. No pressure. It's just there if you guys need it.
I know we only have like 1 minute left, but I always love hearing the answer to it, and just so that you don't sit awkwardly in silence with us. But if you had have had one tidbit of knowledge or that golden nugget at the very beginning of your career, what would you have wished someone had told you?
Well, I feel like my entire talk was kind of like what I wish somebody told me, so I didn't have to like waste all that time learning what I thought I needed to learn. I used to force myself to like, read these really boring books. Like, I don't know if you guys have read The Design of Everyday Things, but that's like the most dry book I've ever come across in my life. And I forced myself to read it and I didn't retain anything. But now with like my new kind of, perspective, what I do, or maybe I can show you, is as I kind of research new topics related to my design, like oh, never mind, I can't do that. As I kind of research like new topics that come to mind, like I use something called inspectional reading, which means I pull in, or I research like a lot of different sources and I skim read them to see what the contents are. and then only read the parts that are relevant to me and try and kind of articulate my own understanding. Whereas like before, I used to just be like, all right, I'm gonna finish this course today, and set these like really weird, like weird kind of like self-inflicted, painful like habits and time blocks. Like, oh, like you're gonna read 5 pages of this boring ass book today. You're gonna finish one module in this course. And then like once I kind of like chilled out a little bit and was like, you know what, I'm just gonna read and learn whatever I'm curious about for as long as I'm curious about it, and then just spend some time actively processing it. Things became so much better. I started like liking design a lot more. I stopped burning out, and actually realized I started retaining nearly all the knowledge I read. And go take a lot of showers, do a lot of laundry, take a lot of walks, and try and like combine that knowledge and connect those ideas in your mind to the problem space that you're passionate about. And that's one of the ways you can become a really good designer. Just forcing yourself to like read the same books and do the same courses everyone else does is not the path to mastery. It's the path to like burnout and self-destruction. So I don't recommend it. Like curiosity-based learning is everything. Like if you love what you're doing, you're curious about what you're learning, you can do it for like 14 hours a day and not be bored or tired. On that note, this is getting like a little bit too self-helpy, but like don't think about like these sources of like high dopamine and low productivity things in your life, like Netflix, YouTube, any sort of like vices, and kind of make sure that you're kind of keeping them controlled in a healthy way, because that's always going to give you a very, very high dopamine hit. And ideally, you want your dopamine hits to come from learning, as weird and nerdy as that sounds. Took me a while, but like, I am now several months clean from Netflix and video games, and I actually find learning fun. And I feel like having that kind of energy will just get you so far in life and design and career in general. And in that note, just always be a constant learner, especially in design, because the field's always changing.
I think that's the new underline on the portfolio. Absent from Netflix for 4 months and counting.
My biggest flex. All right, guys, I think this is the end. Thank you so much for listening to me talk for a full hour. Hope this was beneficial and helpful for you guys. Would love any feedback on this topic or this